Hey, Buru, Iboya, Ibuche, everybody in Cyberland. It's your favorite Babalao. At least I hope so. Omodun, Odileke, coming at you with another great podcast. And I'm trying to keep this podcast either, one session a month or maybe one session every 2 weeks. But I'm going to try to keep up with this while I also have my YouTube account still moving, right? I also post on Instagram, TikTok, right? I'm also giving courses out so people can better understand DeFi, understand what's the Orishas, who the Orishas, the traditions, the cultures, right? So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, right? On top of that, got God kids scattered throughout the U.S., always attentive that I have to make sure that I prioritize the Ile. On top of that, a full-time job. On top of that, I'm a husband and a father and a grandfather. Oof. And that right there is why IFA is important and why the role of a Babalao cannot be understated. But hey, I wanted to kind of talk about a very controversial topic, right? This topic particularly, right? And again, if you want education, go to YouTube. Go ahead and look at my channel there, and I promise you, you will see some great content, right? And if you ever have trouble looking up the channel on YouTube, just go ahead and on the search bar, go ahead and tap in La Regla de IFA, LA space REGLA space DE space IFA. All right. I got tons of things there. I got my link to the Botanica. I got my email addresses posted on there. Or if you look at, at sign Fave Babalao, you'll see some videos on there. Tons of content. My podcast is also listed on there. But nonetheless, I wanted to make sure I kind of closed the loop on a couple of things. As I realized, hey, Rumila's feast day is coming. And I start to think, hey, what am I going to do on Rumila's feast day? And something that came up to mind was, on feast days, there's a lot of moving parts, right? Rumila's feast day is 4 October for those who don't know. But more importantly, right, we set up a nice throne for Rumila. We put his offerings down. We give thanks to him. We reflect on him. That's what feast days are all about, right? So then I remember a conversation I was having with a client. And someone, actually, it wasn't even a conversation I was having. I was just happened to be in the room. And someone said, hey, that they lost a lot of money, right, in this faith. That they sent, I don't know, I think it was like $30,000+ to Nigeria. And they never got back to him, never did anything. I don't know if the guy was trying to initiate an E5. I don't know what was going on. But nonetheless, it got me thinking, right? That intersection, right, of wealth and spirituality, right? Can material wealth be pursued without spiritual consequences? Can, right, a Bawalao live off of the faith, right, while still trying to maintain that balance, right, of spirituality versus now business? That makes you kind of think, right? And I can't. I'm not a hypocrite. I got a full-time job. Been doing this job for 24 years, and I'm a Bawalao, right? So that's how I found my path in life. But some people, they're raised as, from a young age, they train, they learn, and there's a certain worth to that, right? There's a certain worth to that knowledge, to that experience, and that that's priceless, right? And so when we start to think about that intersection, we got to kind of really think and dig deep. So I want to kind of highlight something here, right? And I always like to kind of just always give thanks to all the fans, right? I always want to give thanks to those who subscribed. I don't know if you guys are tracking, but also on the platform that I use, which is Buzzsprout, right? That's where I got all my content listed. I got quite a few no kidding subscribers that are on here, right? And I want to give a big shout out, right, to Keish Miller. Thank you for subscribing. Steve Vargas, thank you for subscribing. Alicia Farmer, thank you for subscribing. And a lot of people always ask me, they're like, well, what does subscribing do? What is that? What is that for? Right. And I would be the first one to tell you, you subscribe, that means now you have direct access, right, to me. That means that now you can begin to ask me, questions via email. I will provide you with a pataki a month, right? I will even go down to trying to explain to you, your odung to a certain point. There's a lot of good information, right, on why you should subscribe, right? Because I'm going to give you knowledge. I'm going to give you something you're probably yearning for if you're in this faith. And that right there in particular is something that we got to kind of, look into a little bit, right? It's an investment nonetheless. But, when it's all said and done, again, I appreciate Alicia, Steve, and Keisha. Thanks a lot for subscribing. All right. Hey, let's go ahead and let's talk about this a little bit, right? Let's talk about the concepts of the intersection, right? The balance of spirituality and money, right? Both from the side of a normal person who, let's just say, they're not an initiate, right? To a person who is an initiate, but not necessarily a babalao. And then let's talk about the babalao, right? So, some of the things that kind of, dwell on me is that there's an old dun called Oyekumei, right? And this particular sign warns us about prioritizing material wealth over spiritual and moral values, right? Oyekumei reflects that excessive greed can lead to destruction, not only in personal life, but within the broader community, which we already know has its own implications. When you talk about Eshu was always monitoring, are we doing the things we're supposed to do? Are we following our destiny, etc.? Right. So what does this Odun kind of suggest? The pursuit of material gain should not come at the cost of neglecting spiritual duties. All right. So now let's unravel that a little bit, right? If you're just a person that's going day in, day out, right? And you have this wealth accumulation that's going well for you. So you have some pretty good prosperity. We got to kind of look at that and reflect on it for a second and say, okay, are you balancing that out with spirituality? Because believe it or not, those who are better off than others can be a direct reflection that your ancestors did what they were supposed to do. And little by little, that generational wealth has picked up, that generational spirituality has picked up, right? And we have to give thanks to those that came before us. They paved the way. They gave you the ability to have an ori that's matured to the point where now you found that prosperity. But here's the thing. Money is not everything. Right? Just because you have prosperity doesn't necessarily mean you got stability. Doesn't necessarily mean you have love. Doesn't necessarily mean that you are covering all bases. Right? And I always tell people focus on the big five. Right? What are the big five that is super important? Well, one, you have love. Two, you got prosperity. Three, you got stability. Four, you got tranquility. And five, you got your health. Right. So when you look at those five things, can you honestly say that you're well balanced in all areas? And that's where Oyakume tells us not necessarily to focus just on prosperity, right? Because then we might be lacking in other departments. But what are those other departments? What are some of those spiritual and moral values that we're lacking? Well, we go to the foot of Ifa and we ask the question. We get consultations to see where we should be maneuvering. Right? It's not rocket science. You allow Ifa to guide you in order for things to work out better. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily focus on too much. So, if you're just that person that has no clue about Ifa or has no clue about spirituality and you don't follow any religion or any way of life spiritually, I think you're in the wrong path. I think you need to give something, right? You could be whatever it is you want to be, but you have to have spirituality. You got to believe in God. That's just the bottom line. Now, let's say you are the person that has the Rawofaka Ikofa. Let's say you understand your destiny to a certain point. Your Ita has been explained to you, has been written down for you. Let's say now you have a thorough understanding where you should maneuver. Maybe you're getting touch points every month or every other month with your Babalao in order to understand if you're maneuvering in the right space. And when you start to do that, right, you start to kind of see that either you're listening to the advice, you're not listening to the advice. But that's all based on whether or not, one, you understand your Ita. Two, you actually have those touch points. And three, are you actually following the advice? I don't know how many times I tell people that when we talk about Ebo, Ifa, Inu, right? We're talking about the concept of your own personal conduct being the solution to many of your problems. Just understanding this way of life, just understanding how to maneuver, just understanding the simple things, just like your ita, you're already gaining traction, right? That's 33% of the battle. You did a spiritual investment to receive these consecrated items. You got them, you got advice. Are you following them? Right? The other 33% is the touch points, right? That puts us up at 66%. Are you getting the consultations every month? Maybe it's not every month because things are going well. And maybe, you don't necessarily need it every month, right? Maybe you need it every other month. All right. Big disclaimer. I will tell you that there are certain babalaos, certain islas. They will say, hey, go ahead and give me, that touch point every 16 days. Because every 16 days, there's a shift in your aura and your energy and the planets and the universe, right? That begins to wipe clean that one level of consultation and those barriers based on your actions if you perform the sacrifices that you needed to perform. Right. So then there's 66% now, right? Where's the other 33%? The other 33% is, are you doing the ebos? Are you doing the ebos that aren't for your odu? Because that's something you need to understand. Every one of the odu of Ifa, the 240 minors to the 16 majors, right, which gives us the 256, all has special ebos that are navigated in order to harness the energy of that odu in order to give you one of the big five: love, prosperity, stability, tranquility, health, right? And when you start talking about those things, it's very important for us to always remember that there's even eboses that you can do even inside your odu, or the ebo that comes out when you do that touch point, right? You do that also there, that consultation, right? Are you truly, doing the ebos that you're supposed to do? Right. So now you're starting to see the many different patterns here, right? Now, let's say you're a babalao, right? Well, your kumei tells the babalao, be careful with the material greed, right? When it's all said and done, it's a numbers game, right? When you're a babalao and this is all you do day in, day out, right? Then you understand that you got to pay a mortgage, you got to pay a car note, you got to put food on the table, you got to do certain things to live, right? And I get it, right? This faith is not, it's not cheap. Why? Because you got material, you got animals, you got to pay other people, to come, because you got to have a certain amount of people. A lot of times people got to fly in from different locations, people got to miss work. So there's a lot of like variances there that have to be understood. And that's a very interesting thing, right? Because now, are we running a business or are we running a spiritual house, right? Or is the spiritual house the business? And that's where things get really tricky. That's when I think even I'm conflicted at times because, I heard a story the other day, you know what I mean? That, up in New York, for a mano de orula, right? Hand of orumila, your agua faca, your eco fa, right? They were charging, north of $3,000, right? And I said, damn, that's a lot of money. Because, as a Bawalao myself, I understand what it takes, to pull a plante, right? Or an initiation ceremony and making sure you got all the ins and outs. But 3,000, north of 3,000 is a lot of money for just one person, right? So then you start to kind of, play that by ear, and you got to start asking yourself other questions, and you got to start saying, are we abusing the spirituality in order to prioritize that over material wealth? Um, or are we taking that serious? Are we taking that a little bit deeper in order to understand, right? And don't get me wrong. There's a lot of situations or scenarios where I can honestly tell you that, certain initiations are expensive. Certain initiations take a lot of different elements in order to pull off the consecration properly. Certain initiations take certain ingredients that we don't even talk about because, touchy topics and just for the sake of not touching on them, you can only allow your imagination to go wild, but certain things carry some crazy things, right? So then, that puts a lot of people into a predicament, right? Oyegumeyi, right? Really sets the tone, right? For what is, the exact, what are we going for here? What are we going for? And then when we talk about another Odu, we talk about Ogundadio, right? Ogundadi, right? And we talk about that speaks about the concepts, right, of lost illusions. It talks a lot about the concepts of failures that come with chasing wealth while ignoring spiritual obligations. Right. And I think this complaint I hear a lot from a lot of people who tune in, a lot of people who email me. And I think the big thing there is, right? Let's say, right, that let's go to the three types of people. No spirituality, has some spirituality, and then is a babalao. The person who has no spirituality has the concept of lost illusion, right? Why? Because they just chase money. They ignore spirituality. They feel like, hey, I got here through my own, accord and through my own dedication and my own sweat, tears, and etc. And probably rightfully so to a certain extent. But you can't ignore spiritual obligation because that's necessary, right? So the Odun, this Odun Ogunda D starts to indicate that wealth pursued without ethical grounding is only going to lead to temporary success, and then they'll follow by failure. Because Ifa teaches us the balance that we're looking for. A lot of the religions teach you balance that you're looking for in the spiritual realm. So we got to kind of look at it again. Let's look at it from the three lenses, right? You got that one person who just has an illusion. That's all he is. Money chasing, power chasing, probably. And that's their life, right? They worked hard. They went to school. Let's just say that they achieve what they achieve, but they don't have the balance that they need, right? And then you have the aleyo, right? The person who has their hand of ifa or has other initiations done, right? Not necessarily a priest or a priestess, right? And now we talk about the lost illusion, right? That comes with chasing wealth, right? The person who understands their ita and their ita or their one of their touch points is telling them, hey, that's a negative, don't do this, and you take it as a positive because in your heart, you're like, man, logically, no, this makes sense. It's a good business move. I know if I said no, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Uh-oh, right? We find that illusion, right? That's the concept I'm talking about that we got to be careful about. Now, let's say you're the babalao, right? You're chasing the wealth, you're chasing the numbers, you're ignoring your God kids. You're not even balanced now because you've taken this as a business model versus a spiritual model, right? And understanding that, we got to live within our means. And that means sometimes sacrifice, right? If you're a Bawalao, you got to be careful about, you charging too much, or you maybe even to a certain extent, even charging too little can hurt you because it's a lost illusion that, you have worth still, but you don't have to abuse the wealth, right? So, there's a couple of things in there that you got to be very careful about, right? And then, I want to follow it up with Eob. Ijiobe, right? Or a lot of people call it Obemeji, right? This is the one that matters the most, I believe. Offers a balanced perspective, right? Indicating, right, that wealth is not inherently bad, but it must be earned through righteous means, balanced with spiritual devotion. When wealth becomes the primary focus, it's going to lead to chaos. I promise you that. And a disconnect from your spiritual path. You could be the greatest babalao out there, but if your mind is on the money, you're losing the true concept of what it is to be a disciple of Orumila. Someone that's reconstructing, destinies, one that's trying to help humanity, one that's trying to be there for the community. Understanding that you can't charge somebody who's living on a fixed income that is barely making ends meet, right? A crazy price for something. Now, understanding that, yes, certain things cost again, right? But that's kind of like going to a car lot, right? And you getting a car at wholesale, right? Factory price versus the dealership price, which is marked up exceptionally high. Sometimes we got to make some exceptions in order to kind of ensure that, we still are not, losing out, but, we don't have to abuse. That's the concept of a derecho, you know. Now, Let's talk about the aleo, the person who has, some form of understanding there. Now we got to understand something. Now we got to understand something, right? And when we talk about understanding, we're talking a lot about, the aleo looking to see what is the goals in their ita, what is the touch points and the answers they were given in order for things to truly flow, right? That's what Yobe talks about, right? When wealth becomes the primary focus, it leads to chaos and discontent, right? And we got to be careful with that. So for all the aleos out there, be very cautious about that, right? Understand, and maneuver around the guidelines that you're being given. And I think that's going to take you far. And then let's talk about the person who has no spirituality at all or is not involved in the faith, right? That balanced perspective, right? Wealth, again, is not bad. And as long as it's earned through righteous means, right? Let's say that you're the person without any spirituality, but you got a good heart. You're a good, ethical, moral person. You will be fine. I will promise you, because just the act of ethical, moral, and legal person highlights what it is to be an Ifa, highlights the way of life that Ifa is trying to outline for humans. And that's my point, right? That's my point right there. The person with no spirituality can be super successful. And those who might need some guidance, the 3 points is ethical, moral, and legal. Are we doing that? So I want to kind of just talk about this, right? Some debate, right? There's some modern interpretations of Ifa, where some practitioners focus heavily on wealth accumulation, right? Potentially clashing with the views of Ifa, right? But it's all based on spiritual purity and balance. I'm not saying that everybody has to run out and become a babalao, run out and get hand of Ifa, even though I recommend everybody get their hand of Ifa. Everybody should know where they're going and how they're getting there. It's like driving your car on the interstate, right? From California and driving just aimlessly. You're trying to get to Florida, but you decide to keep going straight and now you end up in New York. It's little things like that. We got to understand where we're driving this car of life. Right, so I don't know. Just want to kind of bring that up so that we can kind of draw some conversations. Again, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to look me up on YouTube. Feel free to, if you want to shoot me an email or you want to sign up for a course, let me know. And with that said, Iburu, Iboya, Ibucheche.